webcast live, and a recording of this meeting will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting has concluded. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings, but I've had no request for people to speak Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. Please can members refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raise hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. Please remember to keep your microphones muted when you are not talking. Please do not interrupt discussions until you have been notified of your intention to speak and you have been invited to do so. We now move on to the agenda. Agenda 1, welcome and apologies. Geraint, do we have any apologies this morning, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've got apologies from Councillors Catherine Bonera and David Williams.
Thank you, Geraint. Do we have any declarations of interest this morning?
Thank you, members. Can I ask if any of you have any declarations in regards to the housing item? If you could verbally declare them now, or if you think of any during discussions, if you can raise them at the time. Thank you.
I have a grandson who is living in a Bronavon house and on the waiting list for further housing.
Thank you, Councillor Seymour. Move on to agenda item 3. Members, could you state when you had anything to raise in relation to the minutes? If not, I will take them as read. Everyone in agreement? Councillors read. 4. Action sheet. Bex, could you run through the action sheet for us, please?
Thank you, Chair. So, members, there were a couple of actions outstanding from some previous meetings in October and November. You have received the information for all of those actions now. Councillor Seaborn, I have just forwarded you that again. But if you have any questions or any further feedback you'd like to pass on, please do so and I'll get that back to officers. There's also then the action on the recommendations, which you've all received from the last meeting as well. So, Chair, I don't have anything further to add.
Thank you, Bex. Appreciate that. Agenda item 5, addressing the housing crisis. Before we commence our discussions, I would like to welcome Lyndon Puddy, Simon Rose, Manager and Housing Commission. Can I also welcome Councillor Dave Daniels, who is online because he's not feeling well. So thank you, Dave, for making the effort to come to the meeting. Gareth Jones from the Woolwich, Adrian Huckin from Mellin Homes, and Catherine Love for Bronavon. Okay. And got you online. I do apologise. So some are new to this committee. So would you like to introduce yourselves, please, for our officers? Starting with Jane.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Councillor Jane Watkins. I'm Councillor for Fairwater.
Hello, I'm Councillor Lucy Williams, representing Upper Cwmbran Ward.
I'm Councillor John Jones, representing Glenavon.
I'm Councillor Steve Evans from Upper Cwmbran Ward as well.
Councillor Rose Seaborn, Fairwater Ward.
Councillor Lind Clarkson, Aberystwyth Ward.
Councillor Alfie Best, Pontywerth Snatchwood.
Thank you all. Thank you. Members have developed a set of questions, however, individually. So please, members, feel free to contribute to any responses as you feel appropriate. I'd like to put on record the thanks of the committee to all the members of the public who have taken time to email in comments and questions and responded to the Facebook post. We've taken them all into consideration whilst developing our questions for our meeting today. I'm now going to hand over to Lyndon, Simon and Councillor Daniels if you give us a brief overview of the very important report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Good morning, members, and I'd like to echo my thanks to our housing colleagues and partners for coming today to represent housing in general to the scrutiny committee. It's just shows how strong our partnership is really in Torfaen, which is a welcome position for us to be in. I won't go into any extensive detail into the content of this report, Chair, as I assume all members would have read this, and as you've already indicated, you have a number of set questions that you'd like to run us through as partners and agencies. It would be helpful if members want a specific response from any form of partner here in relation to that, although I expect some of the questions will have a crossover across our different areas. Addressing the housing crisis, it's a mammoth task to put it into some form of general idea. There is no single one solution to any of this, because this isn't just a Torfaen or Gwent or Wales. It's a UK issue in such that the demands on the available accommodation in Britain is under strain. You would all note from the various media posts that you see that not only do we have a cost of living crisis in the UK, which is driving the affordability of all the population need to be accessing housing, but there's an expectation as well on every local authority and agency in Wales to be supporting both national and regional government schemes in helping in terms of our resettlement for asylum seekers and refugees. So there's myriads of pressures on the housing sector itself. The cost of living does have a major factor on our RSL partners as well, because they are subject to inflationary costs in the same way that we are as householders ourselves and as organisations ourselves. I pay tribute to Simon, who in fairness, wrote this report to keep it as succinct as he has done, really, in the areas that we wanted to cover. And members would see from the content of the report today that really the key messages we'd like to get across to members is really what does it look like in terms of both the local and the national footprint of the factors that's actually driving the areas of concern that we and all other residents of the UK are facing. How these impact really on housing and the support services across Torfaen. It's not just the provision of housing that's critical in Torfaen. It's also for those vulnerable households that we have in terms of the support provision and the supported housing that's provided in order to support people to remain independent within the communities they live in. And then just to provide an overview of the steps being taken to address some of the impact which is included within the latter end of the report that's before members of the Scrutiny Committee today. Chair, I don't know whether you like Simon to run through some more of the content of this report or whether you wish to go straight into questions.
I think, Simon, it would be helpful if you do a brief overview for us, please.
Certainly, thank you, Chair. Lyndon's put things quite succinctly in terms of the crisis that we're faced with in housing. But what I would go is a little step further, that this is not just a housing issue, as Lyndon's intimated. This is a social issue. It's part of a wider picture that's been evolving over time. I think what has happened is, and we will often have a blaming of the COVID-19 pandemic for a multitude of things that are happening, and the debate still rages on in the press and the news today with certain items that are there for discussion. But ultimately, that pandemic has accelerated a number of factors. It's actually driving a lot of the pressures that we're now seeing. And it didn't take Einstein to work out that with COVID-19, there would be a period of time when we would be faced with significant pressures. We could probably foresee that this would be the case around cost of living, but then the other external factors that Lyndon's touched on, with the crisis in Ukraine, that's still ongoing, the global markets that are there around the cost for energy, oil, gas, that has further driven the pressures on households. And we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's coming through. We're certainly seeing a number of individuals presenting to us now, as indicated in the report, looking for support, advice, assistance, practical help to actually manage day to day. So the use of things such as food banks, the use of our support services are escalating beyond what the services are able to cater for. And we have waiting lists. As you'll see from the report and the annexes there, we have waiting lists. We have waiting lists for housing. We have waiting lists for our support services, not just our static supported accommodation services, which historically we've always had because we've not had a huge amount of supported housing in Torfaen, but also our floating support services. So we're holding a crisis line. The same can be said around social care in terms of the provision there. There's delayed discharges from hospital, as is well documented, and the slowing up of the system. So this is a system-wide issue across a number of agendas. And I don't think we can move away from that in terms of when we're looking at housing here. It's part of a component, a number of components that need to knit together. As I often refer to it, I had a conversation with a colleague in another local authority yesterday, is we've got a jigsaw here, but we haven't got any edge pieces, because this is just coming out and out and out. This is a never-ending puzzle that we can only try and just keep the speed with at this point in time. But a number of other factors that are driving, and as Lyndon's just touched on, house prices, the private rented sector, the drop in the number of available units of affordable accommodation that we have as an alternative to social housing, is giving us a real issue in terms of how we tackle homelessness and housing need. Cost of living pressures. I could probably talk for about 2-3 hours about the cost of living and the issues that people are faced with. You'd be glad to know that I won't. Legislative change is a driving factor in terms of what comes through as well, in terms of the changing markets that are there. The Renting Homes Act has seen a significant drop in the number of landlords within the sector. Again, the report references that in terms of the number of people landlords that are out in Wales, registered on Rent Smart Wales and letting accommodation. Added to that, workforce pressures. It's a real struggle in social care to recruit domiciliary care workers, care staff, support staff in that sector. You can say the same story about support workers. It is very difficult for us to recruit staff in that area. And also within housing, the skills shortage is there. So how do we actually get that working so that we can have a workforce fit for the future in terms of what people are going to be looking for? A number of things in this report that will tease out how we're looking to do that, not just in Torfaen, but across Gwent and across Wales as well. And then the other pressures that Lyndon touched on around Ukraine and the impact of taking accommodation for individuals to support, and rightly so, support individuals who are fleeing abuse, persecution, and obviously the war in Ukraine. So what's the impact on the housing service? So if I rewind pre-pandemic, things were trundling along nicely. We were in the position where we got, typically at the cutting end of homelessness, around about 60 households in temporary accommodation. Very few in B&B. If they were in hotel-type accommodation, it was for 1 or 2 nights until we were able to generate a vacancy and accommodate somebody. We're now running, at any given time, with 100 individuals placed in temporary accommodation. It's nearly a 50% increase, it's not quite. A number of those placements are in hotel-type accommodation and for a period of time. Others are in shared settings that we've established. Others are in leased accommodation that we have and some of our own accommodation. The issue there is quite stark. It paints a clear picture that we haven't got enough accommodation. And that rolls into our Home Seeker service, where we administer the Common Housing Register for the Torfaen area, and we've seen a marked increase in the number of individuals approaching us for accommodation, albeit over the last sort of year or so that's steadied off and plateaued at around about just under 3,000 individuals on the Home Seeker scheme actively looking for accommodation. But you have to put that against the backdrop of a slower turnover in housing stock from our RSL partners, because people aren't moving as much, because the affordable options aren't there. People who are working, who could potentially have moved from maybe a Bronavon home or a Melling home or a Pobble home into maybe their own home that they could buy on the open market just isn't happening because, strange enough, the house prices are too high. So that turnover in housing stock is slowing. So development's the key. And we develop more. Yes, great. Fantastic idea, but we have a land supply issue. So we don't have sufficient land to develop what's needed. We develop what we can, and we forward plan, and we have a 3-year plan in terms of our development, and we've got exceptional partners in terms of developing innovative solutions, some of which are referenced in the report, and you can see what we've been doing in terms of the social housing grant programme with partners. But it's not enough to stem that tide, so we need to think about innovative solutions that are there. Coupled alongside all this are things around the local housing allowance rate for Torfaen, and the rest of the UK has been frozen for the last 3 years. That means that as market rents have risen, the difference between the local housing allowance rate, what people will get in terms of housing benefit, and what the market is projecting, has significantly grown. The gap now is around about £300 on average per property when you look at properties on Rightmove and when you look at what individuals are able to attain through local housing allowance. So we've got a perfect storm here where we've got people coming through the doors who we desperately want to help, and we've got ideas to help that we struggle with. So we're trying to reconfigure some of our services. So the kind of things that we're doing to tackle some of this crisis that's there is firstly to look at our strategic approach to how we tackle those high-level issues. How do we actually work with partners, and as partners as a whole, this, as I said, is a social issue. This encompasses health, social care, education, probation, youth offending service, third sector organisations. This is a true partnership that we're trying to establish on 6 key fronts that I've listed in the report. It's really to tease out some of those key messaging that we need to have in terms of managing expectations, through to actually delivering some real outcomes for people. And that for me is critical, and that's how we'll hopefully be able to strategically manage the tide that's coming. But we can't just sit and wait until that strategy comes into action. So there's stuff we're doing on the ground already, and we're running with and we're working with, and we've been doing that for quite some time. So our homeless prevention activity and intervention focuses on the elements that I've put within the report in section 5.3, which really looks at our housing solutions and interventions, our mediation services, our financial inclusion services, which I have to be fair, for year on year on year, financial inclusion services offered throughout a number of partnerships across the borough have generated a significant amount of income for residents in Torfaen that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to access. And that's kept the wolf from the door, as I would say. We've got our triage and response services that are set up, and we're looking to do more and enhance that. We talked about floating support and outreach, absolutely critical in sustaining accommodation and actually giving people the tools to actually cope and manage in their own accommodation, and then potentially divert to community-based activities, which is a key thing for the council to deliver and part of the county plan. So we're trying to, that is a definite link in terms of what, as a council, we're trying to do strategically to manage those social issues that we're seeing. And then, most importantly, advocacy and support. That, for me, is a fundamental cornerstone of how we work with people and make sure they've got the right advocacy at the right time and the right support and interventions as well. So it is, what I would say is that this is an extremely complex area. People present to us with maybe one issue, and as you, like an onion, as you peel back the layers, you find several other things. So you could have somebody presenting with a financial issue, and then you suddenly find out, okay, we've got some health issues going on here. There's some mental health problems, there's some other serious health conditions that we need to look at and get some support with, or there's some maybe a domestic abuse issue. So it's not one issue that people present with, it's multiple. So staff, and I have to be fair when I'm talking about staff in general, this is across the whole housing and support sector. We are not just housing workers, we're not just support workers, we're almost therapists, counsellors, all rolled into one with our own specialisms around those areas. And that is why we're struggling to find and sustain the workforce that's needed to actually deliver the outcomes. Home seeker policy, I made a recommendation within the report, as you'll see towards the end, that's looked at separately. terms of the changes we've made. The implementation of the Home Seeker revised policy was delayed in the main due to the changes to our IT system that we had to make. These things have to be booked in advance, and sometimes the timings don't work out, and there's issues then when they're being brought in. We'll commit to bringing that forward at a later date for scrutiny to look at in more depth, because it probably deserves its own session as a whole. Increasing the supply of affordable accommodation I've touched on, but the schemes that we've looked at delivering are highlighted in the report. We're looking at around about 182 units of accommodation in that first instance. And then looking at the supply of supported accommodation, we've got a lot of innovation going on. We have increased what we have in terms of supported accommodation over the last year or so, with partnership between the Woolwich, Llanmai, and our RSL, Landlords Bronavon and Melin as well, in terms of provision that we've put in place. So partly supported and semi-supported accommodation that's out in the community. Increase of around about sort of 8 to 10 units, but we want to increase more. So members will have seen the placards that are outside Pearl House now. Pearl House is a flagship scheme that we're looking to develop, which will give 16 units of bespoke independent accommodation for single people. But linked to that will be provision on the lower end in terms of a triage and hub service that will bring a range of activities together. And I'd be happy to take questions around that. It's better than me just trying to explain what Pearl House is here and now. We've then got the different developments of our support services, which are listed there quite extensively. As you can see, there's a lot of reconfiguration of movement going on. What I would say around housing support grant is that whilst that was increased throughout the period of the pandemic to increase the level of support that we could deliver, and that's more than welcome, what we've been faced with now is a flat budget. So in essence, it is a cut, not an increase. It's a static flatline budget. So we have to reconfigure services. We're running on margins. We're constantly moving services around, analysing where we're best placed to actually run different services, but still looking at innovation and pilot projects, as you can see what we're trying to do. And we're trying to be creative with how we fund things as well. And that is almost like a dark art. Let me tell you, that's a very difficult thing to do. Again, I touched on Pearl House. I won't go into that in details, but then that partnership and innovation and regional working, there's a lot of work that goes on across the region. There are groups set up that are there to design, deliver different outcomes and to learn from each other and to co-fund projects going forward. There's a number of examples of that as to what's been there. And then basically in terms of looking forward, I guess as I started out, this is a multifaceted approach that we have to take. We've got a number of partners around the table here today, but we could have probably about 15, 20 different organisations sat here discussing that, and we'd probably take up a full day, if not two, because we all like to talk. At the end of the day, unless we get the partnerships working on the ground and functioning as they should, we're not going to tackle what is a significant social issue, and will only get worse if we don't put some of these measures and steps in place that we're looking to take. It's an intriguing area, it's a fascinating area. It's one that's led to a lot of early hair loss for myself over the last 25 years in local government, but it certainly will be one of the things that need to drive forward how we change delivering services across Torfaen. Not just across Torfaen, but across Gwent and across Wales, because there needs to be different models there. And that's recognised by Welsh Government in some of their policy direction and changes, which has to be commended as well. And I probably haven't put that in the report as much. And with that, I'll probably hand back to you, Chair, in terms of taking any questions.
Simon, that was brilliant. You said you could have spoke to it for hours. We could have gone for 2 days. We've had to be really diligent in our questioning. But before we start our questioning, I'm going to ask Councillor Daniels and Jason if they'd like to say anything. And we also welcome Leslie Groves from our housing team.
Thank you, Chair. I have nothing further to add. I think aside from the report is very comprehensive. I think Simon's done an excellent job there of taking us through the report and also highlighting not just the issues, as you pointed out, as they relate to housing per se, but the wider social issues that have that broader impact upon housing. I would just commend the report, and obviously then pending Councillor Daniel's input, to ask for any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Dave, do you want to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. To be honest, it's mainly to thank the committee for considering this item in particular, because it's not an easy one to tackle. The report is extensive and Simon's intro is extensive for a reason, because there are so many variables, so many factors at play. And it's breaking them down into national, Wales-wide and regional and local. And it's figuring out what we can do locally, because I think there are little things we can do, as Simon's alluded to in his intro and in the report. There are things we can do locally. So I think the ask of the committee today is to help us out to find out what those little things we can do locally, because there's some things we just got to accept that are beyond our control. Interest rates, the housing market on a national scale. And I think it's also worth noting that the housing crisis was present before the pandemic, present before the cost of living crisis, present before Ukraine. It was there, and we were warning of it being a crisis then. It's now turned into an acute crisis, and I think that a lot of the factors that have led us to where we are now, and it doesn't really help where we are now, but have been baked in for quite some time. So it's a big ask to kind of undo those things that have been baked in for quite some time. But, if you're anything like me, I quite like the challenge of trying to find a way out of an impossible situation, hence why I've got social care and housing in my portfolio. My instinct is a problem shared. And that is exactly why we brought this issue to you guys today, because a problem shared is a problem maybe solved, but it's a problem improved anyway. So thank you for the opportunity to discuss this today.
No problem. I'm sure we're going to give it our best showing and come up with some really good results for you to take on board. Okay, so we're ready to start our questioning. You'll be happy to know that question 1 has already been answered by Simon. So I saved you on that one, Simon. So we'll go on to question 2, which is from Councillor Jane Watt.
Thank you. You did sort of touch on this, but central government have frozen the local housing allowance for the 3rd successive year. I wonder if you had any insight into why this is, when the gap between the LHA rates and the market rates are increasing quite significantly.
So you're going to take it in turns?
I think it's a very difficult one to comprehend in many ways. It's obviously a policy decision that rests in Westminster, and it's causing issues not just within Torfaen or within Gwent or within Wales, but UK-wide. And certainly what we're seeing is a net effect of the loss of that, the private rent accessibility for individuals, because that change in the rent level. I can only offer a personal opinion and view, which is around budget management from central government, and possibly then making sure that they're able to fund other activities that they potentially see as more pressing at this particular point in time. It isn't without challenge, because I know Welsh Government have challenged this. As officers, we've challenged this, as we've put things forward, and we see the impact of it day to day, week in, week out, in terms of what we're seeing. And we are underpinning a number of tenancies in the short term with discretionary housing payments through our housing benefit team. Just looking at the housing benefit pot at the moment, it is fully committed and spent, and as a local authority, we put in more funding for that above what allocation we do have, which is something that Torfaen have done as a policy direction for a number of years. Having said that, it only does so much because the pot is only so big, and potentially you could almost use that within the first 3 months of the year in terms of allocating it. So I can only say that it is a government decision because of the finances that they're trying to balance across a whole range of different agendas, and they potentially don't see this as critical as others. Again, that is only my mere opinion, for what it's worth from a professional angle.
I just want to come in.
Sorry, very quickly. Do you know when the last time was that we as a council challenged the decision?
I am not sure exactly when the last one was, but it has been done on a national level. So we've contributed towards national responses that have been there that have more often not been channeled through Welsh Government and officials here. Obviously, it's difficult as a local authority for us to independently challenge. We're one voice out of, crikey, 22 local authorities in Wales and probably 333 local authorities in England, and then I'm not sure how many in Scotland, to be perfectly honest. The impact is there across the board. So it is done more as a collective response. It would be more done through the WLGA and through the Welsh Government.
Councillor Daniels, you had your hands up. Do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, as Simon said, one local authority is very difficult to challenge sort of a national policy decision such as this. But, we do, I was just speaking to Simon yesterday, we are disproportionately loud as a local authority on a WLGA level. We do take a lead on that, and is where we do make these points heard, and then we collectively then challenge UK government and Welsh government where necessary on these things. So, we've challenged them on a number of occasions, really. I mean, I've come in because I think that this is probably ostensibly a political kind of answer, really, because I think that it is policy choice from UK government. I think it is probably because it would be mighty expensive to uplift it to the level that it needs to be, because this would be all across the UK. It's not a reason for not doing it. I think it's a false economy not to do it. But I think that, that is my possibly cynical kind of take on why that hasn't happened to date. I mean, it needs to happen, really, because, like I say, it is a false economy. It is preventing people from getting access to property that they would otherwise, it's locking some people out of access to affordable properties, essentially. So, yeah, I mean, we do challenge, I can promise you that. We do challenge, and it's almost a periodic thing every year. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Councillor Daniels. Anybody else want to come in? Right, we move on to our next question, which comes from Councillor Lucy Williams.
Thank you. First of all, I have to say thank you, Simon, for the really helpful summary of that report. It kind of helped to focus our questions as well. So this is just trying to understand the detail of the information that's come from Rent Smart Wales, which shows the decline in the number of properties registered across Wales. I think we've got the figures right, from 4,060 in January 21 to 3,759 in January 23, and the number of landlords registered has also decreased. So do we get kind of feedback when properties and landlords are deregistered to try and understand the reason, and what sort of support is there available to landlords so we can retain as many as possible?
Anyone take it? Simon?
Yeah. Okay. The information from Rent Smart Wales is fairly recent in the sense that they publish this at the end of each year.
Right.
It's only been the last sort of year that, well, there's been a gradual decline, but the last year has shown a more sharp decline in the numbers. I can only really comment on the feedback that we get from our landlords. I'm not sure what Rent Smart Wales collect in terms of any members that depart. But feedback from landlords is almost a multi-issue. In part, they do cite over-regulation within the sector. They do cite the changes within the Renting Homes Act as being an issue for them, with the changes in the ability to regain possession of their property, with it extend a notice from 2 months to 6 months for a no-fault eviction. But the other issues come back to the financial issues around the market. So there is the increase in mortgage rates. There's the increase in house prices that have led individuals to selling assets that have been sat there, that they've probably come up to retirement age, and they've realised now that the market's at a point where it's at a tipping point. It could well be dropping, so they've elected with their feet to move from the market and sell. And then there's the tax incentives around renting that have changed quite significantly. So the tax breaks are very different. More often than not, what landlords do, the professional landlords, will increase rents, and that's what's slowly happened over time. But from the landlords that we're seeing, it's multi-issue. But one of the biggest factors that we've seen from some landlords where we've had individuals coming through with a notice to leave, it has been predominantly around the changes through the Renting Homes Act, which has led individuals to say, well, along with the tax breaks, along with mortgage rates going up, along with this, we've had enough, we're moving from the sector. And a lot are smaller landlords rather than the larger portfolio holding landlords. They can exhume more, and they've had a portfolio that's grown over time and bought at very different times and obviously different cost levels. So they're in a different financial situation, albeit they are, or they would say to us at the moment, we are financially struggling. I think their financial struggles are very different to the struggles that our residents see and that their tenants will see and that we see day to day. But nevertheless, it's a multitude of things that we're seeing there. When you look at the national picture, the rate of new instructions in Wales, as I think I've outlined in the report, is higher. It's a higher drop than what it is in the rest of the UK. And that tells another story that, yes, there's an issue nationally, but within Wales you can factor in then the Renting Homes Act as being an additional factor that's created that different exit for landlords.
Thank you, Simon. Any officers want to come in from the other RSLs? Councillor Daniels?
Yeah, just to back up with what Simon said, I mean, you know, I think in the seminar before we did highlight that we, along with other local authorities up and down Wales, had challenged the, you know, Renting Homes Wales Act, not because we disagreed with it. You know, we actually agree with the principles of it, because of course people deserve to live in, you know, fit and proper for human habitation, housing, flats, whatever. It's a case of right policy, or broadly right policy, wrong time, because there are so many factors at play, which, you know, Simon's outlined here, which really undermine the purpose of the policy, I think. You know, talking about the, you know, disproportionately in our sort of area of Wales in particular, house prices have gone up. You know, you can keep an eye on, I've been keeping an eye on those in the papers. You know, Torfaen, I think, was singled out as one of those areas where house prices had jumped greater than other areas. And, you know, yeah, I fear that it's been the straw that's broken the camel's back, really, and that landlords have, it's just been one thing too many that have, and I'm not normally sympathetic, I will tell you, I'm not normally sympathetic towards private landlords. I'm normally favoured towards the tenant, but in this current climate, I think we've got no choice but to be pragmatic about it. We don't have the capacity in social housing and to lose capacity in the private market. And I think one ongoing issue out of Renting Homes Wales Act is that we will lose casual renters going forward, not just having lost them already, we will lose them coming onto the market. So that the fear is that our underdeveloped private market will shrink further as a result, and we rely on them. It's disproportionately small compared to other local authority, but we need them nonetheless. So it's a very difficult thing for a Labour person to say, but, you know, I hope it comes across as pragmatic rather than anything else, because I do fundamentally believe in the principles of the Act, and I've said this to the Minister on a number of occasions. It's just on a ground level, on a pragmatic level, it's not having the outcome that we're hoping for. That the houses can be as fit and proper as you like, but if they're not on the market for people to have them, to live in them, it's just theory. So that's the point that we've made a number of times to the Minister. We did ask for it to be paused rather than, you know, just totally done away with, just paused, because like I say, it's the right time, broadly right policy, wrong time. But it's done now, so.
Okay, thank you. I think Leslie wants to come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reassure members that in terms of our private landlords, we do support them. We have a landlord hub that hasn't actually met face-to-face for some time due to COVID restrictions, etc. we've considered continued to send out literature, and we do actually have a number of training sessions which we have pulled together on the Rented Homes app, which our landlords will be able to access free of charge now towards the end of March. So just to let members know that we do continue to keep in contact with all of our landlords and provide them with as much advice and guidance as we possibly can.
Thank you, Leslie. Okay, Lucy. We'll now move on to question 4, which comes from Councillor Linda Clarkson.
Good morning, everyone. Some of the question I was going to ask has already been answered in that previous question, but I'll just pick out the extra bit that I'd like some more information on. When we've got tenants, I'm hoping that at this point we've seen the first flush of landlords handing out notices for people to quit. But when people do get a notice to quit, how are they actually dealt with within the local authority and housing solutions, and how are we capturing that information about how many have been issued so far? And more to the point, what's coming in the future? Have we got a clear idea of how many landlords we've still got within the market that may, if interest rate change, make a decision to give the 6 months notice, and then we've got a headache coming in the future? So do we have any idea about this? And are the tenants that are in this position treated differently as no-fault evictions, basically?
Thank you, Linda. Simon, are you going to answer this one? And then if any of the other housing officers want to come in.
Okay, in terms of anybody presenting with an issue from any form of accommodation, they do, our first point of contact is very much around what can we do to resolve the issue. So in response to somebody who's received a notice from a private landlord, the first thing we will be doing is getting the picture from the individual who's presenting, finding out why that notice has been served, what the issues are. So it could be multifaceted. It could be because the landlord's wanting to move back into the property, move their children into the property, sell the property, or it could be that they want a different tenant because there's been a breakdown in relationships. Ultimately, our first step is to find that story from the tenant and then to speak to the landlord and look at negotiation, and where we can save that tenancy, where we can stop that notice going through, we'll move, if you like to coin a phrase, hell and high water to do so. If it's a financial issue, as you can see, if somebody's on benefits and the landlord wants to increase the rent significantly, there's a gap there. But what we try to do, in more often than not the cases that present, is rather than be moving an individual from that tenancy to a temporary address to then a permanent address, is try and sustain that arrangement with the landlord in the short term, so that we prop up any gap in rent that's there or any issues until we can actually get that person moved to more independent accommodation rather than moving them 2 or 3 times. So we'll do everything we can to save that tenancy. More often than not, particularly now, we've got a 6-month window with notices that come in from the private rented sector for no-fault eviction. It's quite a big window for us to work with, but it takes a lot longer than that to rehouse somebody through the home seeker scheme because of the waiting time that we have. So for a family who want to live in Cwmbran, and there's reasons why they want to remain there, probably takes between 12 to 15 months, if not longer, to rehouse that family into that accommodation. If we were to underpin a tenancy for that period, it's nigh on impossible. So we would have to be working with somebody to bring them into temporary housing. We'll do all we can to actually sustain that. So we will make incentive payments to landlord, goodwill payments to landlords from prevention funds that we have, funding that we've got from Welsh Government, certainly for this year and for the next financial year, allow us to be a little bit more bold with some of our commitments to landlords, so we can pay larger sums to actually retain that. It seems morally wrong in many ways, but it's a cheaper option for us as a local authority than providing temporary accommodation when you look at the cost of that provision. It's also morally right to keep somebody in their home, the home that they probably had for 5, 10, maybe 15 years, whilst we find an alternative that's more sustainable and suitable for them going forward. So we'll do whatever we can in terms of sustaining that accommodation. The numbers that are coming through really ramped up prior to the Renting Homes Act coming into force late last year. I think the figures were around about 110 notices, no-fault eviction notices we had from the private rented sector for around about a 12-month period up to around about October last year. When you compare that to the year before, it was around about 30. So you're talking almost a 400% increase in the number that came through. And you can attribute that, and a lot of those landlords and the feedback we had at the time were the issues that I mentioned earlier around the tax changes, but renting homes coming in and the regulation of the sector and everything else, but also individual circumstances, retirement, other things. But ultimately, we saw a significant increase. That has slowed, but we are still getting individuals coming through through notices from private landlords. We're also seeing landlords giving notices, and we had a case the other day. I was only talking to Leslie earlier today around a case that's come through where an individual, the notice that's been issued is invalid purely because the individual is not registered on Rent Smart Wales. Rent Smart Wales has been running for 5 years, and there are still landlords out there who aren't registered. So that's an illegal notice. So we then intervene, we sustain that accommodation, and we work then with landlord and tenant, one, to get registered, and then for the individual then to have the right occupation contract that should be in place. And the landlord's then in breach of a number of legal duties that they have under Renting Homes Act, but also under the provisions of the licensing for Rent Smart Wales. So that tenancy's been saved for a longer period. And we've got a bit of time to work with somebody then, or to look at exits in terms of alternative provision. So in terms of what we're likely to see going forward, I think we've seen the peak because people exited before the change occurred. Are we going to see more? Yes, we will, because as interest rates continue to rise and people get under more pressure, you will see landlords exiting because they'll want to realise the asset, or they can't afford to retain that, or there'll be other circumstances there. But I think we will see it plateau, so it will gradually drop down. We're not seeing the numbers of that 110 cases over a sort of 12-month period. We're not going to be seeing that this year. I'm fairly confident of that from the figures we have. But we will probably see a few more than what we've historically seen over recent years, where it's been around about the 30 to 35 mark. Probably go up as around about 50 to 60 cases in any given year. But again, one of the recommendations within this report that I put forward is to maybe consider the reasons and issues around homelessness in separate papers going forward, which I think will help to answer some of those questions that you may well have, and also will give you that picture and flavour of what's happening on the ground going forward.
Thank you, Simon. Your answer, Linda?
Yeah, thanks for that response. I think that future work is going to be key in understanding the complexity, and we're all hopeful that it has plateaued as well. But yeah, thanks for that.
Do any of the RSLs want to come in and make any comments? No? No? Okay. Councillor Clarkson, for question 6, please.
Oh, it jumped straight to me.
Yes, sorry, Linda. Number 5's been taken out, okay?
Okay, I'm sort of looking at the workforce issues that were raised in the report, which are obviously of huge concern. We all know that the housing crisis is causing a huge amount of pressures for everybody that's involved in the housing sector. And we've recognised that there's a difficulty attracting new employees into the sector. So the question is, is there any way we can make this role more attractive? And I don't know, it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Whether that be through offering extra training, supported training, more of a graduated training, or what are we doing to support the staff that we've already got, which must be under huge amount of pressure? There is the concern of burnout in such an emotionally pressurised and sensitive sector. So it's just around the staffing issues.
Thank you, Linda. I think Simon's going to come in and then pass over to the RSLs.
Okay, firstly, it is a significant issue, and it's one that I have been raising with Welsh Government for a number of years, certainly prior to COVID and in my previous life in a previous local authority. We were seeing, probably in around about 2015-16, a slowing down of the number of people who were applying for key roles within not just the local authority but within the support sector, also within the, I'd say within the RSL sector. When we advertised jobs, we noticed that we weren't getting the calibre of individual coming through. We were also not getting the volume of applications coming through as well. That's been exacerbated over time with, as I mentioned, the static budgets around housing support grants. When come to mention the support sector in particular, has not helped, because then obviously services that are being commissioned have only got a certain financial envelope, and we're trying to do a significant amount of work with quite a relatively small budget for a large issue. So pay is a distinct issue, and I'm sure Gareth will pick up on that in a second around staff and the issues that they have within the voluntary sector in terms of recruiting support workers. What we do have within our own services, we do have staff. We have been able to retain staff over time. We've had very low turnover within housing over recent years. We've had some recent changes with some roles that have gone out, but we do have interest in those positions. But what I would say is that the number of applications we've seen, as I said, are diminishing. We do provide a range of support, a range of training, a range of different methods in terms of keeping people up to date and help with individuals' development. And I think that's the same for every local authority in terms of the staff that we have there. The critical thing for me is that we're seeing the pressures increasing, the resources coming in for more funding, but more often than not, the funding for some of the roles is short-term. So when we have short-term contracts, people are less inclined to move towards those from other professions that may well be out there if they're interested in coming into the sector. So we've got to really rebuild the sector a little. And I think we're now running against another tide there, in that sector's diminished over time across housing and support in very much the same way as things have happened within social care. So it's almost running parallel. And these are some of the things I was saying a number of years ago, that we were heading the same way as social care. And there's a lot of synergy between housing and social care in terms of the work that's done. It's person-centred, it delivers outcomes, and we're working with quite vulnerable people from different angles there. So it is a very highly pressured role and job. We do have a lot of support that goes in from team structures that are there in terms of ensuring that people are given appropriate support, guidance, help, the tools to actually manage some very difficult and traumatic experiences that we hear. And again, I could talk forever about the type of issues that we do sort of come into contact with, which are quite harrowing at times. So there's a lot of support that goes in, but ultimately it comes back to the level, I think, of pay and some of the credibility that's there, and also some of the burnout we see with the volume of individuals that we're seeing coming through the door. What we try to do, certainly as a local authority in our team, and Leslie would probably nod in agreement to what I'm saying, or I would hope she would at this particular point in time, we very much wrap that virtual arm around staff in terms of what they're doing day to day, that we will give staff that free space to offload where they've had very difficult conversations, very challenging conversations, some very challenging individuals who we see. We provide everything we can, and I would say a little bit more as a local authority in terms of making sure our staff feel safe, supported and included in decisions that we're making going forward in terms of changes. And I think that's a success in terms of how we try to manage the teams that we have, is that it's an inclusive approach. It's not one person leading and doing and saying this is what we're going to do. It is eliciting a view from the collective to say, how do we want to take this forward? Take that on board and then come up with a solution. And that's the approach we take. And I think that's how we've been able to retain staff and attract staff into roles within the local authority. From a support perspective, it's very different, because I think there's different pressures within the third sector in terms of funding. And I'm sure Gareth, if I hand seamlessly over to him now, will be able to talk about that in greater depth than myself.
Thank Simon. Gareth,
Okay, I'll start with probably a bit of anecdotal personal evidence. So I took my first job working in homelessness in 1998. My salary at the time was just shy of £20,000 a year. When I hit the £20,000 a year mark, I thought I'm doing well. I'm doing well for myself here. 25 years on, if I were to take the same job now, the salary would be something like £21,500 a year. So we often talk about wage stagnation in the last 10 years or since 2010. Wage stagnation in our sector goes back beyond that. The reason, I mean, many reasons behind that. I think perhaps as a career it's not valued or seen as professional, even though we've got loads of very dedicated and professional staff working for us. If you look at our staff, the vast majority continued working through the pandemic, staffing projects, working face-to-face with people throughout that. And it's almost like we're the poor relation of, at least people know care work is underpaid and undervalued, but in the support sector, it feels like we're kind of off in the shadows a little bit. I mean, part of the issue with our sector as well is competitive tendering. So we've had years of basically, going up against other organisations to try and secure contracts. So you do that by saying, okay, we should staff it like this, but we need to bring in a price that's close to that. So, part of the reason, yes, is that we've maybe we should have turned around to local authorities and said, well, if this is a service you want, you need to be paying a little bit more. I mean, we are constantly struggling to recruit, and that, I have to say, sadly, that includes in Torvine. In some ways, it's a little bit like we're the bottom of the food chain. So I will speak to people in local government who say, oh, we're having terrible problems recruiting staff, having recruited our staff into their departments. Local government will then say, well, we're having our staff stolen by RSLs, and well, from one local authority, and Welsh Govs. So we just can't. I mean, our sector, we just can't compete with some of the salaries on offer. And if you look at our organisation in 2021, our lowest paid staff received a 9% pay rise. We thought, fantastic. We're finally starting to bring some of our lower paid staff up. Inflation's now 10%. So again, it's a pay cut. And again, the HSG, the grants, Welsh Gov, in all fairness, over the years, it's a budget they've protected, but they haven't been able to increase. And that's, I just think, increases the pressure on us as support providers. So what we are seeing now is, I think, local authorities saying we want to fund services properly, but we probably can't fund as much as we have been funding. So, okay.
Thank you. Councillor Daniels, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, just to agree with what Simon and Gareth have just said, actually. On the issue of external providers, we had a WRG presentation from, I think it was Shelter recently, and that was quite stark, actually, because that highlighted the financial difficulty that some staff providing external services across Wales were finding themselves in. So, some were having to, turn to food banks, and these are the people we're expecting to have a sympathetic ear, and they're having to have just ample amounts of sympathy for people in similar situations. Makes me very uncomfortable that we'll have people going to to someone who's struggling themselves with similar problems, and is not a good dynamic, in short. So we've made clear to the Minister that this can't go on, because, to answer your question simply, what would attract people and retain people in the role is to pay more. And I think it's, I take a pragmatic view that, Welsh Government they have their funding dealt to them by UK government, and that has been challenging for the past decade or 13 years. But we've hit crisis point. We've hit a sort of a point where something needs to change with this. And Gareth's absolutely right. It doesn't get the coverage. And I will put my hand up and say that the presentation that we received from Katie Dalton at Shelter was quite an eye-opener for me. I was aware that the staff were, the pay in that particular area was not great, and that people were there because they loved the job. But it's got to that point, similar to care, where it's not enough to love the job. You need to be able to sustain on the job. So in short, I mean, we'll continue to make representations through, Torfaen and through the WLJ to say, look, the HS gene just needs to be uplifted. And to enable us to pay staff, pay these external services the grants that they need to pay decent wages to the staff that they want to keep and attract. So that, just to give a reassurance that we are making disproportionate noise in Torfaen, and we will be using the WLJ voice as much as we can.
Thank you, Councillor Daniels. This is an issue we've been up against in previous seminars, and we would do everything we can to support our social teams. Our next question is question 7 and comes from Councillor Watkins, please.
Thank you. Dealing with paragraph 4.8, where it deals with the dispersal of asylum seekers and Ukrainians, how many Ukrainian and asylum families or individuals are currently being hosted in Torfaen? And have we had any incidents of the host breakdowns where we've had to address a required resettlement?
Yes, Lyndon, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, thank you for the question there, Councillor Watkins. We've currently got 24 households hosting in the Torfaen area, circa 78 people with that. We've had, since we've introduced the scheme over a year ago, we've lost one of those hosts. We have an extensive cohesion support team here that works with our hosts on a daily basis. So it's not simply the fact that hosts are supporting people fleeing the war in Ukraine and just left alone in Wales. Our team are literally on a daily basis in touch with landlords. We've supported those, can't call them landlords, I'm sorry, they're hosts. That support, I think, has been invaluable to those hosts because they haven't been left alone. I think some of the issues that we have from a local authority perspective is some of the national changes that came in from government went to those hosts first before they actually came to the local authority, and they were, around. Give you an example, extending the scheme. So originally the ask was for 6 months, then extended to 12 months, it's now 2 years. So it was, those hosts had that directly from the government without, and it would have been much easier had it come into our team, and our team would do what they usually do, which is their proactive activity, which is getting out there and speaking to those hosts. Because those hosts are vitally critical to the ongoing support for Ukrainian households coming through into Torfaen. It's vital because we've already got a significant number of people waiting to come through the homeless route into temporary accommodation. Had we further breakdowns with those, and the hosts that did break down, we've managed to reallocate to another property, so it didn't go through the homelessness route as such. We would only be putting additional pressure back into the homelessness sector if we weren't working so proactively with our existing hosts in the scheme. You've probably heard me waxing lyrically about Christopher Hunt and his team in the way that he's led the process, really, not just in terms of our response to Ukraine, but our response to Afghanistan, to our response to assumed dispersal, he's really taken up the baton and worked very proactively. We are looking at, we are aware, committee, at the fact that, that the welcome centres around Wales are closing down the Welsh Government Super Sponsor Scheme. We will be expected to help support that scheme, and we are trying to look now at innovative ways in which we can use the funding that comes with those schemes in terms of those households' access into the private rented sector, which, as Simon eloquently mentioned earlier, is a very small market. It's 8% of the market in Torfaen in terms of its capacity. So we are trying to look at alternative ways in which we can support those families rather than going through the homeless note and rather than putting additional pressures on our RSL partners in terms of the RSL stock that they have available. Does that answer your question, Councillor Watkins? Thank you.
Anyone else want to come in? Okay. We'll move on to next question comes from Councillor Williams, Councillor Lucy Williams.
Thank you. I guess this question links with what we were talking about before about supporting staff. It was very interesting to hear, Simon, when you said the big increase of people seeking support in various ways, and the whole kind of advocacy and mediation being so important. So perhaps this might be a question for our colleagues from Melyn and Bronavon, but particularly looking at people who are coming for support because of mental health issues, what kind of, and obviously completely recognise it's very multifaceted, and maybe a mental health issue might kind of be at the bottom of the symptoms that are presented. So it'd be interesting to hear sort of how you're managing this and what kind of things you're managing to put in place when there's a very clear mental health problem that's affecting the whole issue.
Thanks, Councillor. I think from a Bronavon perspective, it is something that we're seeing increase significantly, which obviously then places a significant amount of pressure on particularly our community housing and support teams. And I think the step change that we've really noticed is the complexity of those things. So whereas there may be a whole list of symptoms and mental health is just one in those symptoms, it is becoming increasingly more like the complexity of the mental health issues is the overriding issue, if you like, that particular customer needs to have the support for us to be able to sustain the tenancy. And in all honesty, I think as an organisation we feel a little bit frustrated about what options there are available to us, because everybody's under pressure. You know, that it isn't a simple case of, oh, well, we can just refer into the NHS. It's not just a case that we can refer into any of the support floating services. Social care is under pressure. And so in response to that, what we've done is really upped the game, particularly with our partners in public health and Iron Bevan, in improving the levels of training for our community housing and support officers. We've done, during the pandemic, our entire customer-facing teams went through the RAP training so that they take a trauma-informed approach to service delivery. And we have really seen significant benefits and improvement in outcomes around tenancies as a result of that. And then we're also working with an Iron Bevan to make sure that we're tapping into the self-help tools that are available for customers who can, and signposting that, but also making sure that our teams are increasingly trained on the mental health trends that we see. I think something for us to really think about in the borough as a whole is how we are responding to the growing level of neurodiverse issues amongst, I see it particularly with our customers. It's something that I know a lot about personally. And, we want to be working particularly with health partners to redesign the way we provide services, provide homes, so that we are, amongst our other accessibility criteria, we're almost designing for neurodiverse customers as a given, rather than trying to put the support in later on, so that we can do everything that we can as a housing organisation to make sure we're not adding to a mental health issue, and that we are delivering services that support individuals rather than add to it. There's not a straight answer to it. It is a complex issue.
Thank you. That was a very succinct answer.
I noticed, just to get a bit of detail, that in the report under 5.3 there's Llamau support young people and their parents to prevent homelessness. Can you say a little bit more about how that works and the number of people that have been referred to Llamau?
Okay, in terms of the mediation service, I haven't got the figures to hand. I can get those in terms of the numbers of people that's worked with. But it links, the mediation service links into our Torfaen Young Persons Support Service TIPS.
Okay.
So they work hand in hand. Individuals who come in there are obviously then, if there's an opportunity to have mediation between parents, or excluder, it may be aunt, uncle, it may be grandparent, maybe parent, maybe guardian, and the young person, identify the issues, work with them to work through those, and hopefully sustain the accommodation. Over the years, the work that Llamau have done has proven to be highly successful in terms of mediating and saving those settings and working in a more planned way to actually get individuals through to independent accommodation. I think as time's gone on, it's become more difficult, more challenging, particularly with, again, COVID-19, the lack of face-to-face work, because the mediation virtually probably doesn't work. Mediation face-to-face will work, and that's probably slowed some of those things down. I think in terms of it, it's more around that responsiveness. And as it was described to me many years ago with mediation from Llamau, one of the workers was described as Superman, who was literally called on the phone and literally parachuted in with his cape billowing in the wind, and was able to then just drop in and actually stop that young person coming into temporary accommodation, prop up the situation at home with a number of things that were being worked on to address those issues that had led to that potential exclusion. So the service, it's invaluable. The numbers that we've got now, I haven't got, but I can get you the figures. But it is certainly preventing a number of young people coming into the services and putting them in the wrong setting, i.e. B&B with other people, putting them in highly vulnerable situations, or potentially going into our social care services where we've got young people who we're supporting through TIPS. So it's diverting that, and it's taking some of the pressure away, albeit probably not huge numbers. We're not talking hundreds here. No. We're probably talking 10s, 20s, 30s that the impact is on, but it is invaluable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Daniels, do you want to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's not an easy one to give a succinct answer to, because it's a reminder of how interlinked everything is. You know, how core mental health is to everything, really. You know, we have Platform, or last time I checked, we had Platform delivering mental health housing related service out of the Pontypool Market, and they provide a vital service in kind of helping people, general ages, not just younger people, retain their tenancy. Because I would say, especially right now, I think that mental health is present in a lot of people with complex issues, and it's often a kind of a chicken or egg situation, really, because you can't solve one issue without also solving the other, and it's usually mental health that you need to get on top of to be able to tackle those other issues. It's very frustrating. It's interlinked because we have a terrible waiting list in NHS services for mental health support, and I think that is really impacting on people's ability to maintain and move beyond the mental health crises that they're living with. It's absolutely core to keeping people in their own home, really, is the honest answer to that. So it's something I feel quite passionate about myself, and it's something I sort of reference at every given opportunity, that housing is a common denominator in so many other things, but so is mental health. Mental health is absolutely core to just about everything we talk about, and it is absolutely the key to helping people maintain their tenancies better. Not just the financial aspect. Financial aspect is obviously, and I think that gets a lot of exposure, but I think household stability is very much based on the individuals in that household, whether there's one or whether there's many, and their mental health. So.
Thank you, Councillor Daniels. This certainly is a very emotive subject, so can I remind members that we've got an awful lot of questions left and there's not that much time to do it, so can we remain focused on our questioning, please? Thank you. Next question comes from Councillor Steve Evans.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. I can see the passion, I can see the pressure, and I can see the good work that's happening already, even though the financial pressures are there, the housing shortage, I see all that. The question I've got is, are we proactive enough in dealing with issues such as antisocial behaviour, which may cause some residents to request moves, or to put pressure on housing services that may be alleviated if we dealt with the localised issues? So, rather than, moving people because there's issues, can we deal with them in-house? That's the easiest answer to that one. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just if I pick this up from the local authority position first, because I'm sure Melyn and Bronavon will have their own particular response to this as well. In terms of the relationship between the Community Safety Service that sits within Torfaen and the associated support factors around that, work extensively with our RSL partners in terms of reported antisocial behaviour. Whether that stops people moving for several factors, Councillor Evans, I couldn't really comment on that. I'll leave that to my RSL partners to respond with. What I can say to members, and probably members don't, it doesn't always feel this way to members, and accept that as well, is that we do react and work extensively on issues of antisocial behaviour in a partnership way, because RSLs can't do it on their own, police can't do it on their own, and we certainly can't do it. We can't do it on our own. So we have a hub system in Torfaen that my colleague Kate Williams led some significant time ago. Actually, it was the first in Gwent to be established, which was that multi-agency approach to antisocial behaviour, which included our RSL partners in that approach. I don't think there's any more I can add to that from the local authority perspective, Councillor Evans, at this particular time, but I'm more than happy to come back once my colleagues have had an opportunity to comment as well.
Okay, who wants to come in?
Not to prolong the answer too much, because I think Lyndon's put a very succinct answer forward. I think the thing for us is this touches on the previous answers around the complexity of mental health. I mean, from a Bronavon perspective, we work intensively to try and resolve ASB, irrespective of how complex it is, working closely with partners, but it's rare that there's a quick fix for it. And, in our trust and satisfaction surveys that we do with our tenants, ASB routinely is a key issue for all of our tenants, but it's very difficult to resolve ASB where both parties feel that things have been dealt with appropriately, because sometimes one or two of those parties have expectations that are beyond reality and what a good outcome should look like. And it does take a lot of expectation management from the team. And that was all I was going to say on that one.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to come in? Adrian, from
yeah. Thanks very much. Yes, just picking up, I think from our perspective, it really is interlinked. Life is more complex now, I think, than it was when I started in the housing career. So there's a lot more that we have to deal with the front line. I think in men, we kind of split it, really. We have a specialist team that deals with, I would call the hard end, or the hard edge of some of the community safety cases we got, and we liaise very closely with the police and the council, and we won't tolerate and we will take action on that. And that has been difficult because there's been some restrictions, as we all know, on evictions, quite rightly in many respects over the last few years. And we pride ourselves on actually carrying out any evictions in Melyn over the last few years. But we did one the other week, not in Torfaen, up in Blaenau Gwent, because of some extreme antisocial behaviour. So the important thing is that you have the tool sometimes in the box to use, but you don't want to use it. I think more interestingly, really, is a lot at the lower level, I would call it. So it's not our specialist team, but our neighbourhood housing officers that operate. And that's more conversational in many respects. A lot of the low-level nuisance that we deal with is very much, as you were saying, Kath, trying to deal with parties on the ground to broker some sort of solutions there, really. And we can't do that on our own, really. And that does link into the previous question, really, understanding some of the complexities. So I think our approach is sort of twofold, really. It's very much working with our residents and communities, because it's not always residents of ours that are, perpetrators of it. Yeah. It's very often wider community issues that we've got. And what we have seen is a notable increase, obviously, in working with the police in certain activities in certain areas, some of it low level and some of it sort of high level, really. So I think we've just got to keep working, I think it was said by Lyndon, really collectively with the council's community safety team and the police on this. But from my point of view, at a higher level, we will and we have taken action when we need to.
Thank you all. We're now going to go and move on to the second part of the report, which steps to manage the crisis. And the first question on this issue comes from Councillor Seaborn. Councillor Seaborn?
Thank you, Chair. And thank the officers. You can feel the passion in this debate, can't you, this morning? It is, but it's something that we've got to get our head round and get a solution to. So my question is about 5.1, and there's 4 bullet points on my question. So, and it's about the development and delivery of the revised local housing strategy. First of all, I'd like to know who forms the membership of the Strategic Housing Partnership. My second question is, how will we ensure that the local housing strategy ties in with our other strategies and our county plan, as well as the plans for our other partners? The third bullet point is, can we have further information on the summit, please? And the fourth one, are there key areas of focus realistic and achievable, particularly in the first area, addressing the supply and the sustainability of affordable housing development? So a bit of a mouthful there, a bit of a long question, but a few pertinent points.
Right.
Thank
Who's
you.
going to take it? Linda?
Thank you for your question. Comes to your questions, I should say, really, shouldn't I? In the plural there, with a few points. This conversation started round about May, June and July last year, really, with myself, Councillor Daniels, and with Jason O'Brien, who, of course, is the strategic director for this area, in terms of reinvigorating a more strategic approach to housing, and vitally importantly, reinvigorating the strategic conversations with our key partner, RSL landlords. That was part of the main drive of looking at housing in a much more strategic and concise way, because the pandemic put a halt to some of that work, and it needed to have a reconfiguration and a reinvigoration, actually, and concentration on housing within the council and at leadership team and at cabinet level and with all members, to be frank. Councillor Daniels has heavily pushed housing, quite rightly so, in my view, as a key service within the council. helped support that through leadership team with Jason, who's also been a big advocate of this process. So we sought to reinvigorate a new way of looking at things. So we've been looking at a strategic housing partnership that's come off the back of the Housing Summit that was held in October last year. And Councillor Seaborn, I'm more than happy to share the outcome report of that summit with yourselves, which was a secondary part of your question there. And I'm happy, in essence, if the members of this committee would like to see it as well. It's not a secret in any shape or form.
I think that'd be useful.
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Thank you.
The outcome of that summit raised 6 real key areas of activity that we wanted to take forward. That's now going to be sat within the Strategic Housing Partnership, and that partnership is a chief executive, chief officer, and head of service group manager level type conversations on taking forward those agendas around the strategic elements of housing. So, to give you an example, you've got 4 members of that panel sat here today. You've got Catherine, Adrian, myself, and Simon, that are taking forward those proposals in those 6 areas. And I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I'm sure Simon can put a little bit more meat on the bones for those at the moment in delivering what's important to making housing a forceful tool in Torfaen. And one of those areas is certainly the supply of housing, and the Strategic Housing Partnership will be built on what the local housing strategy will develop into as well. You would recall from Simon's earlier comments, we can't just sit still and let these things happen. So we're already trying to work through, you might think, oh, it's a little bit cart before the horse, but it's all working in the same direction of strategically approaching housing in terms of the housing need in Torfaen. We know we have a housing land issue in Torfaen. All members know we've had that, because you've not only had that from housing professionals and partners, but you've also had that from planning colleagues. We also have those issues around land supply. So I've tried to sort of condense those 4 questions you raised, Councillor Seaborn, into a succinct response, as I'm hoping the Chair will appreciate, but I'm happy to pick up any supplementaries.
Does anyone want to come in? Adrian.
Can I just come back with a supplementary? Because obviously it's not just Torfaen that's suffering this, it's the whole of the country really. And how are we linking in? Is the Strategic Housing Partnership linking in with the regional PSB? And if so, in what way?
As you know, Councillor Seaborn, you and Councillor Williams are going to be sat on the PSB Scrutiny Committee, and the Wellbeing Plan is coming to you next month for that scrutiny. And within that plan is housing. Housing is in one of the key objectives in the first part. I was quite pleased that was included, actually. So it was a really good front and centre part of the process that looks at good quality, affordable housing in terms of supply, and what we're doing in terms of the vulnerabilities of those individuals that could be in accommodation that needs additional work in terms of warmth and waterproofing as well as part of that process. So is it going to be working with the regional PSB? It will be, because the local delivery group, to which I've now extended an invite to Simon, which will be the partnership driver for the regional wellbeing plan, linked to the county plan, that will be linked to the Strategic Housing Partnership work programme. So there are synergies that run across all 3. What I'm really keen that we don't do, though, Councillor Seaborn, is that we start duplicating work at regional and local level. I want to be doing things once and impact across local and regional.
Adrian, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Lyndon.
Yes, please. Yeah, I mean, this is. I welcome this. Firstly, the Strategic Housing Partnership. We're very, very supportive of it. I think the 6. We did add one, which was around existing properties, which I think it was really important for us, particularly around climate change and decarb and the WHQS stuff as well. A couple of things just to make, so I know time is not with us today, but firstly, we can deliver them, but we have to work across the piece in partnership. So there are some big players to come into Councillor Seaborn's point earlier that we need to make sure are part of this partnership, and health is one of them. So however you do it, my plea is make sure health, around the table with the money and with the knowledge as well. The other thing around development is it's about pace, because I think Simon put it quite well there. There's some real aspirational stuff in this, but we need to develop more homes at pace. It's as simple as that, really. I do understand the issues that we've got with land constraint in Torfaen, and we have some good ideas, I think, that's emerging. So some of the subgroups that are coming underneath the partnership, I think, we want to give them their sort of head, if you like, to get on with things, So I'm really confident. I really think Torfaen's leading the way here to re-establish this partnership. We operate across Gwent, Melin, and I don't see it across the other authorities at the moment. It does need to connect up, Councillor Seaborn again is right, with the housing market. It's not just in Torfaen, it's in a wider Gwent, and actually across Wales is the issue. So I think we can make some real inroads. The one caveat I would say around construction is that we linking into the people stuff earlier, we are lacking the numbers and skills in construction. So that's something we need to focus on. And there's a latest CITBA report saying that there's a big gap there. So just wanted to make that comment, and thanks for the opportunity to say that. Supportive of the partnership, we can achieve it, but we've got to make sure we work together on it.
Thank you, Adrian. Before we move on, I think Councillor Daniels wants to briefly come in.
Yeah, really quickly. It was just to say that the previous Strategic Housing Forum, as it was just far too diffuse. The membership just wasn't appropriate. We didn't have the people necessary in the meeting to take the decisions and have that kind of ability to take those decisions necessary. The new guys that Lyndon has overseen brings together, to answer your question about the PSB linkage. I mean, the people around the table in the Strategic Housing Partnership will be the same people who will be in the PSB. And that's the most important thing, really, is we're going to be having, it's chaired by Alan Brunt, who's obviously chief executive of Bron Avon. And it'll be, the representation from similar level people there. And hopefully, I mean, this was very much the feel with the summit as well. We had it very concise because we needed the people who are in crucial positions to be able to affect the change that needs to happen. And lots of the conversations that came out of the summit, because I sat on each table periodically through the day, lots of conversations were sorts of frustrations that came out of just lack of linking up, conversations between, so we had conversations between council officers and RSL officers or other agencies that hadn't previously happened, probably in earnest. So we're hoping to sort of break that down just to accelerate things. I know I'm speaking very abstractly now, but we're hoping to break, improve that communication and break down that kind of those barriers that get in the way of delivery of units, delivery of new properties. So, frustrations that RSLs might have with planning, we're hoping to meet them halfway and try and kind of accelerate in that sort of way, really. So I'm hoping that builds on the answer that's already been given.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Question 11, which comes from Councillor Steve Evans, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. First of all, I have to declare an interest because I sit on a public service board scrutiny for South Wales Fire and Rescue. So that's the first thing I'll have to say there. My question around the homelessness prevention activity and interventions. There's two parts to this question, really. It's important to remember not all homeless cases are individuals and are often family units. How do we take into account childcare support and school allocation when housing families who will become homeless? That's the first part of that. And the next part is, have we explored innovative development design for homeless accommodations, such as container units or modular facilities? I was watching a football game last night with Lou Macari, and he started an innovative project with like Anderson type shelters, but they were wooden and they were in a disused manufacturing building. Now, he was using it for homeless. Are we looking at stuff like that? That was the only thing.
Simon?
Okay, thank you, Councillor. In terms of the first point around what do we take into account when we're accommodating individuals, yes, we do, where we practicably can, in terms of looking at where individual support networks are, where children go to school, where employment's in place, particularly around families. We do our very, very best to put people in accommodation that's within communities that they're familiar with. If not, it's as close as we can get. If it isn't something that we can get very close, then it is short term, and then we look to bring people back to their as close as we can to communities or within the communities that they're from. It's not always practicable to do so in many ways because of the supply issues we have. So we have to make use of the limited resources that are there, but we do make every effort to do that. The second point about innovative approaches, yes, we have looked at a number of things around converted shipping containers, pods, different designs. The issues that come with this is that in many ways you have to have an infrastructure that sits around some of the pods and the facilities that are there in terms of having some services. So electric in place, waste provision. Obviously as well, there's issues around siting some of the accommodation, some of the units that are there. So it's not as straightforward as is often portrayed in the press. And certainly I did see the article you mentioned around Lumbakari and the approach he's taken in terms of accommodating individuals there. There's a number of examples of that have happened around the pandemic, during the pandemic, and putting different provision in place. But it does come back again to having the right location, and that is more often than not the problem. Having the right location for some of these units is not always easy. Although we have explored the possibility and feasibility of looking at different provision that's there. And as I touched on when I was just giving that rounded approach to how we're looking at trying to solve some of the crises, Pearl House is a prime example of how we're trying to reposition accommodation in disused units that are available within the community and bring an effectively underutilised resource back to life in another form. So we are being as innovative as we can within the resources we've got, but also being pragmatic about what we can achieve.
Thank you, Simon. Does that answer your question, Steve?
Yeah, I just I'm thinking, can we do more? I know we're doing as much as we can at the moment, but I've just looked at, if they can do it, can we try different things? That was all.
Sorry. Jason?
I think Councillor Daniels was up before me, Chair, but I'm happy to jump in front of him.
You can jump in front of me, just this once.
Just to add, Councillor Evans, in terms of the first question around considerations for things like, children's school and stuff like that. Obviously, what will happen as well with any move and any level of vulnerability that's identified, and a change of school placement could be identified as a vulnerability clearly. There's obviously that multi-agency approach to resolving any problems as well, and looking at things like with school transport and stuff like that, so that if families are housed and being housed temporarily, obviously we want as minimal disruption to that family as possible. So other services, within the local authority would kick in to try and resolve any of those vulnerabilities and any of those concerns that any families may have there as well.
Thank you. David, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. From my perspective, the elephant in the room around part one of Councillor Evans' question is that the current housing crisis that we've got and the numbers that we're dealing with mean that choice is severely restricted, and any element of choice you add into the mix. So the more specific you get, if you want to go to a specific part of Cwmbran that, you know, your waiting time to get somewhere is incredibly long. If you want to go somewhere, if you want to go anywhere in Cwmbran, waiting time is long. If your choice is broad across the whole of the borough, that is your fastest way of getting somewhere. But obviously that doesn't suit some of the people that you're talking about, you know, with specific needs for, you know, school placements, family base and everything like that. And this is why the housing crisis, I believe it has a disproportionate impact on people with vulnerabilities, because there are people, and we will try our very, very best to accommodate for those vulnerabilities and those needs, but it's severely impacted by the ability and capacity of the system. And often we find ourselves in a situation where you'll have a homeless a family unit that find themselves homeless, that have these specific needs for where they need to be placed. But from our perspective, the most pressing thing is to get them a place as soon as possible, because you've got those children living in incredibly unstable, really difficult situations. So these are the really hard conversations that our staff have to put up with every single day. They absolutely empathise with those, with the people that they speak to and the needs that they have. But at the bottom line is they need to get them somewhere as soon as possible. So it's not an easy thing to answer, if I'm honest with you, Steve. The only thing that will actually improve that situation and improve the choice of the system is getting more units online and you know, rationalising perhaps the people that are on the waiting lists and whatnot, which have been referred to in the report by Simon. On the latter, I mean, you know, I think I wanted to say a little bit about Pearl House, and I will do very quickly, conscious of the time. It's a very, very innovative project. It's very, very good. It's something that, you know, I personally have hoped for many years, and it's finally being delivered by, you know, this wasn't plan A, by the way. This was plan B after another property that we were hoping to secure fell through. But you wouldn't think it from it, because it is fantastic. You know, it's a sustainable way of delivering temporary accommodation for individuals, some of which we might otherwise have found themselves getting hardened to homelessness. So that some of the individuals that we get reported about are people who unfortunately haven't had the issues addressed early enough. Hopefully this will stem those issues further down the line in a more sustainable way. So I totally agree with looking at projects like modular units and whatnot, but I think the preference, where possible, and clearly we're hopefully delivering locally, the preference is more sustainable than that. So absolutely, it's something that we'll never write off, but our preference is to find some more sustainable solutions, such as Pearl House, going forward. Sorry for taking up so much time.
We appreciate it. Officers, we've still got another 6 questions to ask. I know you're very busy, but could you spare another 10 to 15 minutes maximum with us? Because it's such an emotive subject. Thank you very much. We're grateful. Our next question was already been answered. So we get on to question 13, which comes from Councillor Clarkson.
Hi, yeah, there's quite a few aspects to this question, so I'll try and make it as succinct as possible for you to answer. And this is something that is more on the achievable side, but would need some flexibility. And these are issues that we get contact from residents a lot in our inboxes. So it's really to the RSLs, and the first part of it is that the turnover of empty properties can be quite slow at times. The reasons for this are sometimes that they're waiting for repairs and there's a hold up in contractors going in to do that. There's waiting for grant funding has been an issue in some of our properties in my ward that held up and kept them empty for a considerable number of months. That was Welsh Government grant funding. And sometimes we get complaints from people who are trying to give back properties that they've been asked to remove a lot of improvements that they've made. And that can sometimes put them off giving up the properties because there's a cost implication, and it obviously takes time to get services in to do that for them. So there's that flexibility in whether we could look at turning around properties more quickly. The other aspect of the question is around empty nests. Are we identifying our under-occupied properties and helping people effectively to move on from those? My experience is that it only gets identified in some cases when there's a change in the contract, people moving out, partnerships breaking down, that type of thing. So we've got a lot of people living in larger properties that sometimes are desperate to move on to smaller properties because there's the financial burden on them again of maintaining these larger properties. But we all appreciate that there's a chronic shortage in the smaller properties to move them on to. The other issue around that would be mutual exchanges. They can get quite complex at times. The inspections can be quite strict. People get turned down for mutual exchanges because of adaptations, features in their garden sometimes that they're asked to remove before the mutual exchange can actually take place. There seems to be, we can have a bit more flexibility around that to move people into more suitable areas that, you know, have got care needs that are, as they're increasing in age and need to move closer to families. So whether this as a large sort of project, we could look at that area of how we can help people move on within the system to more appropriate positions, more appropriate housing, and sort of speed things up generally. That's as succinct as I can put that, sorry.
Thank you, Linda. I'll ask Adrian from Melin to come in first.
Yeah, I'll try to be as succinct. I'll just quickly speak from a context perspective from Melin. Circa 1,800, 1,900 properties in Torfaen. Last year, just in terms of context, we had 122 properties that were void. That's the previous year. This financial year, we're up to about 91, 92. So you can see the turnover rate. So it's good from our perspective. It's not a big churn, but it's not good from a supply point of view in terms of helping the crisis. We turn the properties around within about 28 days on average. That has slipped in the last quarter to about 36, 37. And that's because some of the properties we're having to do more checks on from a compliance point of view, and I expect it's the same from Brunavon as well. So we want to turn them around quickly, of course. So I suppose the first point I've got is that numerically, yeah, it does help. It probably doesn't help Simon and Lyndon in a great sense because we're not generating, not churning enough properties for us. From a landlord's point of view, it's great. People are in there paying rent. The other 2 points then, I think, is one is around regeneration, because I think the point has been made before by Councillor Daniels, but I think we do need to look more at regenerating not just Cwmbran, Pontypool and Blaenavon, but other parts of Torfaen. And obviously, yes, we're involved with Pearl House, and we're very excited to be involved with that, but we need to do more of that, bring back that into use to kind of increase the supply. So there are things that we can do to be more effective as an association. I would certainly welcome what Simon was saying about a review of the Home Seeker policy, which I know is going to be undertaken. We need to look at that, and I think we can pick up the issues of transfers and exchanges, and I think some of the really good points that was made there around flexibility. But at it has to be put in the wider context of the previous discussion, really, which is around supply. We've got to find a way, collectively, getting more properties back into use. The other thing I know we're working on very closely with one of the strands with environment health in Torfaen as well, is in the private sector, obviously, and bringing those units back into use in the private sector. And there are some landmark, if we drive up and down, the 12 miles up and down the road, there are some landmark properties that I think we can target for investment. The final point to mention in terms of funding, which is unique to all associations, but there's a standard viability funding model that's in place, which is creaking a little bit. So we're working with the Welsh Government, because we look at supported housing, they don't start to stack up financially. So what we're suggesting is we use more creatively other funds, social housing grant funds, but also things like the ICF fund that's been worked, and whether we can use those funds together, because at the moment we're being prohibited sometimes with supported housing. So I'm sorry it's a quick run through there. I'm confident over the partnership that we've set up, we're working more closely together, we're starting to tackle these really thorny issues. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else want to come in? Dave? Councillor Daniels, do you want to come in, please?
Dave's absolutely fine. I actually prefer it. On the empty homes point, I think that the issue there is that some of the long-term empty homes, we're at the mercy of. They're long-term because we're at the mercy of private owners and what they decide to do with them. They don't have to sell them. They don't have to do, as long as they're maintaining them. They don't have to do much with them if they don't want to. So I think Bridgend Council recently announced that they were increasing the council tax for long-term empty properties. I think this is something that we could consider locally. I'm not normally a fan of the stick approach and normally a fan of the carrot approach, but I think in this particular case, it might be beneficial to try and push those owners of long-term empty properties into doing something, if not offloading those properties, because I think we haven't got a huge amount in comparison to other local authorities, but when we have a land availability issue, we have to look everywhere for potential units that could be delivered with our RSL partners. What was the second part of the question? I'm trying to remember.
It was at the changes.
Changes.
Exchanges.
Well, exchanges.
Exchanges, yes, sorry.
Exchanges and the under occupancy issues.
Yes, this came out of the house. I'm not going to keep you now because I'm conscious of the time. But this came out of the Housing Summit, actually. I think is a potentially fruitful angle to go down, because I think that there are a lot of people who would like to downsize. And if they had an offer of maybe an RSL bungalow or something like that in exchange for their property, that could, and we could figure out a way of doing that, I think that might potentially unlock some 3-bed houses, 4-bed houses. If we could figure out a way of doing that, I think it's potentially fruitful. But again, it has to be based on choice, really. So we have to make that an attractive option.
Okay, anybody
Yeah,
else
if I
want-
could just quickly come back in there. Yeah, there's the chronic shortage in those properties, David, is something that on the development side of things, it's that joined up thinking again, where are the shortages in the appropriate properties to move on for retirees, elderly people, that type of thing. Because at the moment we have a chronic shortage in Torfaen of these move-on properties. The other, just adding on to the back of that, the Empty Homes Grant Scheme came up yesterday when we were discussing this. Is Torfaen actually taking part in that? And if not, why not?
Simon, do you want to come in? Okay, Simon, do you want to come in, please?
We've got a number of schemes that already run in Torfaen that we operate, and in terms of the scheme that's been set up and running across a number of local authorities, at this point we've elected as a local authority, and Councillor Daniels will be aware of this, not to take part in the scheme. There's a number of issues around this, in that we potentially don't firstly have sufficient infrastructure in terms of surveying capacity, but ultimately in terms of the products that we already have that we deliver locally for landlords and homeowners, we've got sufficient resource at this particular point in time. So it's not something that we would bring any material benefit back to Torfaen. So we've elected at this point not to take part, but we're keeping an eye on how that progresses and develops. We did take part in the initial pilot of the project, and we did bring some properties on stream, but it's not something that we felt we could sustain at this particular juncture, particularly with everything else we've got going on, because we feel that that was sufficient for the volume of enquiries and demand that we currently have. We do promote a number of schemes internally, so we've got loan schemes, a number of things that we do have a periodic advertisement of those through Twitter and different Facebook feeds and such. So we've got a proactive approach in terms of getting that information out there. And we do bring a number of properties back into use. I don't have the full figures in terms of the numbers that have been brought back into use over the last year, but we can certainly get that through to members if they would wish to receive that.
I think that'd be useful, Simon. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Clarkson, has that answered your questions?
Yes, I think that has. I think the next question's mine as well, Chair. Did you want me to carry on?
Can, but I think part of it's been already answered on the mental health issues. But if you want to have a brief question, I'm sure.
Yes, please, if I could. Yeah, I've been looking around the country at innovative sort of projects that are happening regarding supporting sort of using housing more appropriately. And I've noticed Cornwall has got a scheme where, with the empty nesters that have got 3 beds, they are actually providing a scheme to link up with lodgers, so that you've got some care going in for the elderly person and support in the way of what they're looking for, plus somebody is actually getting a home at the same time. There's other innovative schemes going on as well in that sort of scope. So are we looking at these around the country to see whether there's anything that we may be able to borrow or adapt?
Simon?
I will keep my answer very brief. It's a simple yes. Any innovation that's out there, we're looking at. We're looking to remodel. We're looking to repurpose. We're looking to bring different options up to people across the board. We're certainly not static in thinking that we've got all the answers, and we certainly do look at other areas in terms of what's been delivered, not just in terms of accommodation, but different ways of delivering support, advice, and different interventions as well. We've got we've got a scheme that is running locally around young people, which is around supported lodgings, run by Llanmai. We've got a number of other provisions that we've got across Gwent, which is runs for adults, which is around shared lives. So there's already provision that we do have in the borough that we're looking to build on, develop and improve and enhance that as well. Equally, in terms of provision that our RSL partners have, in particular, with reference to particular groups, elderly accommodation, we're looking at different innovative ways in which that can be remodelled, reshaped and delivered in different manners so that it meets the changing needs. So, in short, the answer was yes, but with a couple more words on from myself.
Okay, anyone else wants to come in before we move on? Lucy, I think you've got the next question, please, question 16.
To be honest, I'm quite happy that that question has been answered in all the previous questions. I'm happy to pass on that.
Anything else? Right, so moving forward, we'll go on to question 19, which is one of... On paragraph 5.6, this will be for single people and provide a focused provision aimed at providing safe and secure accommodation to individuals who are homeless, whilst their housing and support needs are assessed fully before moving into the most appropriate form of provision. What if the most appropriate form of provision is not available? How do we react?
Okay, what I would say is this is a model that's under development at the moment. So in terms of the vision, we've got the broad vision of how Pearl House will operate and function, but the actual mechanics and how things operate or will operate day to day in terms of the hub and the accommodation and how people will move through the system are yet to be really sort of belt and braces bolted down. But the premise is very much that it provides us with a period of accommodation where individuals would stay at Pearl House for no longer than 6 months. We'll be looking at 6 months as a general maximum, although it could be extended. The idea is that we identify what's the most appropriate form of accommodation. If it's not available there and then, we look at what other options are there. Do they fit? Are they a better fit than the remaining at Pearl House? If it's a no, the individual will stay at Pearl House until that option's there. The idea is very much to build on a rapid rehousing approach, in that if we've got somebody who goes into Pearl House who's ready to move to independent accommodation, why would we keep them in supported housing with support when we've got other people who need that support? The idea would be to funnel them into independent accommodation at the earliest opportunities. And they're conversations that we'll be having with all partners around how we actually facilitate that in terms of that rapid rehousing model. I have to caveat this with everything we've been talking about earlier around the supply of accommodation, because we can only deliver rapid rehousing if we've got an adequate supply of housing. And to have a rapid rehousing process, policy, direction is a little bit foolish in many ways without that adequate supply. But we can work to the premise of some of those core principles of rapid rehousing in terms of going forward. But some of the way in which it works in Scotland is very much built on significantly different housing markets. You're talking about stock holding authorities with 20,000 plus properties. They've got a much higher turnover that Adrian has just mentioned there in terms of the volume of properties that they've got a very different housing stock and profile, a lot more tenements, which are flats and masonette type accommodations. So it's a very different provision that's there in Scotland. So in terms of that policy direction from Welsh Government, great, I subscribe to the ethos of it and the functionality and how it could potentially work. And Pearl House is a component part for how we will move forward on that. But we need the infrastructure behind. So, in essence, it is very much if you like, something that we haven't got at the moment is somewhere where we can actually work with somebody initially and understand what their needs and requirements are before we decide to put them in A, B or C. We've probably got A, B or C now. We haven't got the precursor to it where we're working out which is the best option. And sometimes we're getting it wrong because we haven't got the choice.
Thank you, Simon. That's really interesting to know. It's been remiss of me, but I've missed Councillor Watkins's question out. So do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Going back to paragraph 5.8, changing the access processes to support accommodation, advice and interventions. Are there any gaps in the provision or partnership provision for support and intervention services?
You want to go, Simon?
There are gaps in service provision. If there weren't gaps, we wouldn't have waiting lists for the provision that's there. We certainly have a significant demand for provision around, say, mental health. And we spoke earlier around the backlogs that are there within health. The same can be replicated with some of our services there in terms of supporting some of the more challenging individuals who we've got there. So we do have very generic services that plug a gap in the interim whilst individuals are moving on to more appropriate forms of support and provision that's out there. I guess in terms of some of the other services that we have, we do see a growing issue at this point in time, and I think this has been born somewhat out of the pandemic again. I hate to repeat that again, but we have seen a growing number of individuals coming through with hoarding issues. So we have set up some pilot projects around hoarding to try and address those difficulties that people have. That's a theme that's been coming through across Gwent. So there's a number of different schemes that have been set up, and it's how we maybe sustain those, because they're done on short-term funding, how we can sustain them going forward. So there's some of the gaps that are there. We're constantly looking at the needs that are coming through in terms of what we're seeing and how we actually try and plug those in the short, medium and then longer term, and constantly reconfiguring services. I think Gareth touched on it earlier, that there's constant dialogue between our providers that we commission through Housing Support Grant in how we can rescope, reshape and reevaluate services to meet the changing needs that we're seeing. And the beauty of the Strategic Housing Partnership will be that we should be able to get this fed up through the structures we're putting in underneath that. We should be able to see some of those day-to-day operational pressures and issues filtering in so that they can inform some of the policy directions and partnership approaches that we need to address the issues going forward.
That's brilliant. Lyndon, do you want to come in, please?
Just to come on the back of what Simon mentioned here, it was remiss of me earlier, but in terms of the Strategic Housing Partnership, that's been held accountable by Councillor Daniels, and it will be held accountable to the Scrutiny Committee here as part of that process. Councillor Daniels is going to chair a challenge-type panel into the Strategic Housing Partnership to ensure that it stays on message and on stream. And of course, that we can always come back into this scrutiny arena to update on what the partnership is doing as well, Chair.
Yeah, just going back to Councillor Watkins' question, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that more resources wouldn't be helpful, but and Simon's obviously given a very full answer. I think the other critical thing for us is around using data. You know, basically spotting those things happening and intervening as early as possible. And, you know, I know that from a Bron Avon perspective, over the last 2 years, we've really concentrated on building up that level of data and insight that our teams are able to use to help spot those things and intervene early. We're at the very start of the process, but I absolutely think that we can probably expand that to work across partnership to make sure that we're, you know, really pulling on all the information that we have available to us to make sure we spot and act as early as possible.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm sure we'd all glad to hear that. We come to our last question, gentlemen, and that comes from Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chair. I've been very quiet over this meeting. We received comments from the public, and one of them was with regards to the Help to Buy scheme. It will be great if the limit of the house price of the Help to Buy programme is adjusted accordingly to the asking price of the new build houses, or to not be only for new build houses. They are the most expensive. There are very good houses that are older but affordable. Do we or the Welsh Government have any scope in reviewing or feeding comment into a review of this scheme?
Who would like to take it, Simon?
I'm just Leslie, could I bring you in, as this is probably your area of expertise more than my own, and you will only correct me if I get it wrong, and probably scowl on the screen at me as well. So could I ask you to come in on that?
Yes, come on.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. So in terms of the national scheme, which Welsh Government provide, that absolutely is just for new build properties. And there is a consideration taken in terms of values of properties. There's quite a high threshold on those. And for the properties in Torfaen, they should be achievable to access that scheme. Through the Welsh Government process and the values of the properties that we've got in Torfaen. In terms of the local scheme, our own Help to Own scheme, we have two avenues of purchasing through that scheme. So the first is for new builds, so that's any schemes which the RSLs build. We always ensure that a proportion of those go for intermediate rent and low cost home ownership. That meets our local housing market intermediate products. So we always try to ensure that we create a balanced scheme. Obviously, they are new builds, so they are offered to people on the waiting list, on the Help to Own waiting list, typically around 30% below market value. But we do make that flexible, so we can go down to 60-40. We don't tend to go down to 50-50 because that doesn't really work with the way in which the grant funding is provided by Welsh Government, but there is flexibility to go down to 60-40. We also have the other route, which is the DIY home buy funding, which is Welsh Government grant funding, which we allocate on an annual basis. We offer that, we deliver that through Melin Homes, and that is grant funding for people who wish to go out onto the open market, identify a property through the open market, and then they receive 30%, 40% towards the value of that property in grant funding. So there is that ability within Torfaen to access existing properties to purchase. It's a real success programme that we've had in Torfaen. We've been one of the local authorities across Wales that have been quite successful in keeping that scheme going. And I think the credit needs to go to Melin Homes, their development team and their home buy team in Melin for keeping that process going. There are quite stringent criteria which they need to follow, which is set by Welsh Government, and that is set to ensure that people are not put at risk. So there's affordability assessments, there's bands which so for a single person, a couple, couple plus one, couple plus two, etc., the values that which they are allowed to go up to, and that's to make sure that we're not putting anybody at risk of overstretching their finances and purchasing a property which, when circumstances change in a few years, might become unaffordable for them. So we do have both routes in Torfaen, new build and existing dwellings. We put approximately £500,000 into the DIY home route every year. Welsh Government has changed that recently to We're not permitted to take it out of our main programme, so we do work with our RSL partners to deliver that through Recycle Capital Grant, which the RSLs have built up over a number of years from previous sales. And it's something that we will continue to deliver because people have much more choice with a DIY home buy because they can purchase in the area where they want to live rather than where the new development is being built. So yes, absolutely, it's a really successful programme that we've got in Torfaen.
Thank you, Leslie. Much appreciated your input.
Chair, can I ask a supplementary on that? The DIY home buy,
Yes,
is
of
that
course you
available for deposits on homes, or is it just a part of the... No, right.
It's for an equity share, yeah. We are not allowed to provide, Welsh Government don't permit us allowed to provide deposits. Anybody going through the new build or the DIY home buy has to raise that mortgage, that deposit themselves and have the ability to raise the mortgage. With DIY home buy and equity share, it is only a 5% mortgage, not like market mortgages where it's more towards 10%. But the interest rates are slightly higher. But it is only a 5% interest deposit that they have to find.
Thank you.
Okay, Rose. Come in, please. Well, you'll be pleased to know, or probably not, that we've now come to the end of our individual questioning. We could have spent all afternoon here as well, but taking up your valuable time is just so emotive. Before we close the meeting and ask you to leave, do any of you want to sort of finalise anything or address anything? Okay. Well,
thank you.
Well, thank you all very much for giving your time. We really appreciate it, and you leave us now time to make our recommendations. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And
thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Members online, if you could just bear with us for 2 minutes while officers and invitees leave the meeting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Apologies, members online, will just be 2 more minutes. Thank you. Apology, members, we're just waiting for 2 members to return to the chamber and then we can resume with the recommendations. Thank you.
We're still waiting for one councillor to come back, so hopefully it won't be too long. Okay, members, we're all back in the office now. Can I please remind you that the meeting is still in formal proceedings and is still being webcast. Can I refer now to the scrutiny activities that we've been asked to review and invite you for your offer to offer any of your recommendations. And now I'm going to hand you over to Bex, who will formulate and take us through the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. If I can just quickly draw your attention then to the scrutiny activity for the meeting today, which was the Healthier ONS Committee is invited to review the information provided and assess whether the issues outlined in this report reflect the local issues that are being brought to you by your constituents, determine whether the steps, activities and work being undertaken will help address the housing demands and pressures at a local level, and then provide any recommendations you may have to the exec member. So firstly, in terms of the issues, are you satisfied that the report fully encompasses all the issues with regards to the local housing market? Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
But there's still room for improvement, isn't
there? And then, can I say, obviously your recommendations will encompass now the steps that they're taking. So can I open it up to members to make your recommendations on those steps?
Right, Lucy, should we go around? Lucy, do you have anything that you want to bring to attention, please?
Well, just two things. I think one of them has been addressed, is going to be addressed already, and that was about the, what's it called, that group, the Strategic Housing Group. I think there's already a recommendation that we have a seminar about that, so that's all, I agree with that. The other one, I wondered if it might be useful to have feedback further down the line on the actions of mitigating the effect of the Rental Homes Act, because that's clearly going to be an ongoing issue.
Okay.
That's what my suggestion was.
Jane, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, just carrying on from what Councillor Williams was saying there about the Strategic Housing Partnership. I didn't know whether, I know that Lyndon said that they would supply information from the Summit, which I think is good, but I didn't know whether we wanted to make that an actual recommendation to make sure it's followed through.
Yeah, I've noted that then as an action point, so I'll pop that in the action sheet to make sure that you get that information as soon as we can following the meeting.
Okay. Linda, do you want to come in, please? Councillor Clarkson.
Yes, please. There's obviously been a lot of changes in the recent months regarding the situation with housing, which has been affected by legislation. Whether or not we put a recommendation in that the scope is widened in how we're discussing this, and we take this again to a separate member seminar to get some feedback from other councillors, and to share the information about the changes a little bit more. I know we've had some information on the Rented Homes Act, but there's a lot of and we've had information on Pearl House, but pulling it all together to look at the overall situation may be helpful. I'm not sure what other councillors think. There is another point, but I'm happy to bring that back in a minute.
Councillor Best.
Oh, sorry, can I just come in there quickly, Councillor Clarkson, just to address that? Obviously, I will pop that down with regards to a seminar for all members. But just to remind members, obviously, this was an issue that was combined from a few issues that will raise that visioning, a few separate items that you then agree to take as one sort of, and has been a very large item that you've considered today. So it may be that when visioning happens again in the summer, that you may want to take certain elements back out and look at those more specifically. So they will all stay on your radar. Thank you.
Thanks, Bex. Councillor Best, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, I know it was touched upon in questioning, but it's a big say.
I think you're frozen.
Yeah, Councillor Best is frozen. We can't hear him.
So, Councillor Seaborn, do you want to come in then, please? And we'll go back to
Yeah,
Councillor Best. I
will, and then Alfie can come in after. The points I picked up is on question 2, 4.3, and with regard to national government, and I wondered whether or not we could write to our MP and lobby Nick Thomas-Simmons to ask a particular question around 4.3 about central government funds frozen for the LHA rate. The other point I picked up was I think we should be looking at best practice. I did have a couple of emails through, and there's a lot of debate going on right across the country, and there might be some really good ideas coming out of that. And I know Linda picked up the Cornwall bit, but I think we could look at best practice and take some ideas from that. Question 18, I think an officer said that they're underdeveloped on the use of data, and this should expand across all partners. So a recommendation that is taken forward, I think, would be good. I don't know what other members think. And personally, I'd like more information about the grants available, the DIY home buy and the right to buy schemes at home support. So whether that's just sent to us as elected members or so that we can inform our residents or not. Thank you. That's my bit.
Bex wants to come in a minute, please.
So can I just check, Councillor Seaborn, in regards to your first point about writing to the MP, did you want the committee, the chair and the committee to write to the MP, or do you want the exec member to make representation on your behalf?
I think we ought to go to the exec member and get him to...
I think the exec member. I think, the political point there is to be made to national government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Steve Evans, please. Councillor Best, are you okay now to come in?
Yeah, sorry, I was just typing out my answer. I disconnected there. I was just talking about the piloting niche and specialist services for people experiencing homeless due to LGBT, hoarding issues, etc. I thought maybe it'd be good for us members to get updates on how these pilots are going, so that if they do become full projects and policy, that we have the information to signpost residents.
Thank you, Alfie. Steve, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, I'm probably sorry, because I had a phone call. I'm doing a disciplinary after this, and they phoned me halfway in between anyway. Yeah, what I want to know is what data we got regarding, when I raised a question regarding, when children are going to different schools, they've been made homeless and this, that and the other. Have we got any, they didn't come forward with any data, because how many people have been moved and say we've had to move to Blenavon from Cwmbran, therefore the school is in Cwmbran. What I wanted to know is how much data and how many people have had to use that service to do that. That's one of the recommendations I was quite fatigued. And the other thing, that the RSLs were very vague on their recommendations about dealing with mental health issues and antisocial behaviour. They were very, very vague, and they didn't give any specific what they do or what they're intended to do. They just give a very vague answer. So I wasn't impressed with that, to be honest with you.
Sorry, Councillor Evans. Unless you can kind of rephrase, if they're more sort of questions than recommendations, are you... I mean, I can pop on the action sheet.
Yeah, the recommendation is, what is their policy? Because at the end of the day, they give a vague answer, but the recommendation is, we don't know what they're doing. regarding the policy of the RSLs or us as a borough. Always saying that, well, yeah, we deal with mental health issues, we refer them here and then refer them there, but we've got nothing, no evidence to back that up.
Bex, I don't really think this is coming out as a recommendation. It's just an observation or an action plan.
I wonder if we could re-put that, Councillor Evans, into a recommendation, because what I did notice that Bronavon was saying was that one of the things that they are doing specifically is to give much better training to their officers. So it would be, maybe we could, and it's clear that a lot of the gaps in skills and not so much technical gaps, but training on interpersonal skills. So maybe we could ask, as a recommendation, what kind of, or as a recommendation, maybe this question, what kind of further training out there is there for officers on the ground to develop interpersonal skills, and what, and when we're advertising posts for employees, to kind of focus more on that kind of skill set, because it's very much the face-to-face interpersonal skills that are needed to address things like mental health issues and the complexity. Does that kind of like turn it around a bit to an action?
How's that, Steve?
What does that sort of answer your question, Steve?
Yeah, the reason I asked that, I was at platform yesterday, and you know, I'm dealing with people from Bronavon, and they were new people, so they didn't have the necessary skills and the knowledge to deal with people like this. And this is why I was concerned that the recommendation is to make sure that the right skills are in there for the right people to do the job for the residents that they're representing.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure it's going to be as much as a recommendation, but I'm concerned about the recruitment. Why aren't we getting people in? What should we be doing more as an incentives to get people into this sector? Because it's ongoing for the carers as well, and it's a knock-on effect, and we can be in a desperate situation. So what can we do, or what can the officers do to encourage and with incentives to get more staff recruitment? Yeah. And that's a big thing as far as I'm concerned, which links into what Stephen's saying. Yeah. Okay. Linda, do you want to come back in?
Yes, please. I'd like to see something done with regard in determining whether the steps are addressing the housing demands and pressures on a local level. I'd like to see the RSLs giving us more information on their under occupancy, their turnover of properties, how long it's taken for repairs to be sort of got through on turning them over, that type of information, because I think that's the low-hanging fruit. I think, so if they could prepare some information, it would help them as well to have clearer information on what the housing need is. If there's a specific need for more move-on properties for people downsizing, then that would feed in again to local development plan, developers, that type of information. Rebecca, does that make, can you make something out of that?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Clarkson. I also had that noted down in one of mine that was raised, and also Councillor Daniel said that was something that came out of this summit as well, that they would like to do more work around that under occupancy, that they see that as a key area for getting hold of those bigger houses. So, yeah, I have that noted down. Thank you.
And the only
Thank
one,
you.
Sorry, thanks, Linda. The only one I've got is the development and the vision for Pearl House. He said there's new innovation. I would like to have updated regularly as a committee on how this is progressing, because it's a bit of trial and error at the moment. So I think that's worthy keeping on our agenda. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to come in? Rose?
Yes, please, Chair. I just feel there should be a question on the state of the housing repairs, and because they did say that they were short-staffed, and I wondered whether or not they should investigate using local businesses to source their repairs rather than depending upon their own or employing their own staff. So if there's a kind of recommendation that we look to outsource the repairs from the...
I think we do that, Rose, already, but on what level it is, I don't know, because I get a lot of complaints of residents about shoddy work done by independent, contractors.
Yeah, but you could you can have a quality list of traders that they could actually use. They did say it was difficulty in staffing the maintenance staff within the plumbers and different things. But if you had a quality list like we did with DFGs at one time, they could possibly outsource that work to qualified and responsible workforce rather than because some of the complaints I have is, that they actually are terrible. The inspector comes and doesn't see a problem, or the workman comes and they've got to go back 4 times before he gets the job put right.
Bex, do you want to come in?
Just to say, I've got to leave now, but thanks everybody, and I'll speak to you all again.
Okay. Sorry, Bex.
That's okay. Sorry, Councillor Seaborn. Can I just clarify? Are you talking about repeat for existing tenants or for the turnover of the new properties for new tenants?
I think both existing and turnover. I think the recommendation should be that we actually look to using qualified staff on a register of suitable traders, I would say. To overcome the staffing shortage.
Yeah, I'll note it down in regards to concerns. Obviously, it's difficult because you didn't scrutinise that in too great a detail. So if I frame it more in general, look to avenues to reduce the time taken.
I think it was mentioned by. I think it was mentioned by Adrian Hecken that they haven't got the staff and that they are having the same problems as the council in staffing and the maintenance. So it was brought up.
Okay, Linda, do you want to come in with another recommendation?
Yeah, it's something I mentioned in my recommendation that Rebecca's taken down regarding under occupancy. But I know there's some work from the LDP regarding what type of housing we need in Torfaen to deal with our specific housing crisis, but whether or not we can have that more clearly identified, so that it highlights it so that it can be addressed going forward. We have got a chronic shortage of some types of housing in suitable areas, and it does link in again to all of our other policies on placemaking and.
Yeah, I think that also ties in with another point that I had noted down that Adrian had raised as well about looking at regenerating other parts of Torfaen, and it goes back to points that you've raised previously as well about retail units, etc. Flats above shops and things, and looking at alternatives perhaps like that.
So the two things go together. We need to identify what we're short of, and then what we've got to actually fill that gap, and that just seems like a separate piece of work in itself to me.
Anyone else have any observations, recommendations? Obviously, the one question I got, and it's more of an observation, about the number of Ukrainian families being hosted. I think it would be wise to have an update on if that's been increased or if the hosts are decreasing, because you said got 78 people there, and now it's extended to 2 years from 6 months to 12 months. I think that'd be useful to have continue to have some information on that.
Regular updates.
Basically. Okay. Anyone else wants to come in now before we finalise these recommendations, please?
Come in there quickly. Sorry, Chair, can I come in quickly?
Bex.
Sorry, members, just quickly to go through a couple of notes and to cross-reference with the recommendations you've made there. Obviously, Councillor Seaborn, you've raised the issue about writing to the Minister. Obviously, there was the issues about the LHA grant, and because that's central government. So,
the MP as well as the Minister, Bex. I think you've got to go to Westminster as well as Welsh Government.
Yeah, sorry, I meant the MP. Because obviously Councillor Daniel said they appreciate it would be massively expensive, but he sees that as a false economy. There was also about the HSG grant that he would like to see, and an uplift in that as well. So obviously whether you give your backing to further lobbying on that issue. Councillor Jones, you just raised the issue about asylum seekers and how they need to look, and Lyndon raised it about how they need to look at more innovative schemes because the Welsh Government scheme is ending now. So Lyndon did say that they need to look at more innovative schemes to support families rather than taking them down the homeless route. So I don't know if you want to tie that in with the recommendation Councillor Jones made. There was 2 action points there which you've raised about sharing the outcome of the summit, and also Councillor Williams, you raised you would like further information on the number of young people that have been supported and worked with FMAU. You've raised the issue about regenerating other parts of Torfaen, and that ties in with Councillor Clarkson's recommendation about the LDP and clearly identifying areas and then how we can use those. There was also, it was brought up about the review of the home seeker policy. Now, as I mentioned, that is an item that can be pulled out of that for your visioning, so more than a recommendation. That's not necessarily a recommendation, more of a comment or observation. I'll pop at the bottom that will be raised at visioning.
Lucy wants to come in a minute.
And sorry.
How did you word the recommendation I suggested?
Sorry, it wasn't the recommendation. It was an action point. You raised about young people being supported by FMAU on mental health services, and Simon said he'd get you that information after the meeting.
Simon said he didn't have the information.
He didn't have the numbers.
Right. Yes.
So that's an action point rather than a recommendation. There was also just one last point then, because I've got 2. So there was the recommendation on data, but Councillor Seaborn has raised that. So there was only the other one to tie in about the empty properties. I didn't know if you want to make a recommendation about that. That was a key issue that came up in your question. And also Councillor Daniel said that was a key theme in the summit as well. So
I think that's important. So that's really
about encouraging people who may have moved away, etc. Greater emphasis and publicity about the options that are available to people.
Absolutely, I mentioned that yesterday, and imprisoned as well. They might be gone for 2 years, and there's a property waiting for them to come out. So moving away.
We need consultation on that, isn't it? Because it's a bit of a stick action rather than the usual carrot, as Dave Daniels pointed out. It's a difficult one if they're private properties and they're unoccupied. But
so I think that was his point about how we can encourage them to do that. So treat that as a priority area.
Yes.
Lucy, do you want to
Yes, sorry. I think I'm not quite sure whether that would be addressed, but it was about probably more continued update about the effect on private properties following the Rental Home Act. I'm not quite sure how to put that into a question, but I think it's quite important to keep an eye on the amount of privately rented properties, whether that is continuing to plateau, whether it's still an issue. Just to keep an eye on that situation in relation to private rented properties.
So I'll pop any issues of updates or requests of updates that you've had on the action sheet rather than just recommendations.
that could be a data issue again, isn't it? It's what are the actual figures now that we've got left of privately rented properties, so that we can identify the risk going forward, or potential risk.
I think we've really emphasised our concerns through this seminar. I'm sure the officers have really taken on board how passionate we all are, and I think it's something that's to continue long into the months ahead. But if we don't have any more recommendations, can we be guided now by item 6, which is the consideration of the item for our next meeting, please? Bex.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you will see from item 6, it's the report that sets out the potential items that you consider. So, first off, you have your basket of items that you selected at visioning. You have the exec forward plan for consideration, and you'll see that at the time of publishing this, there were no relevant decisions that are relevant to this committee that are forthcoming at the moment. And then you have audit referrals. You'll see there have been 2 audit referrals, the first of which, Together We Can, Community Resilience and Self-Reliance. And as you'll be aware, obviously as a committee, you took that item on community resilience in your December meeting, and you have had the responses to those recommendations, so you're ahead of the game there. And there is another one on missed opportunity social enterprises. So that is a potential. All I will say is that you were scheduled to take the Children's Services report to your January meeting, and you did ask that that was a real priority back at visioning. So that would be looking, the report, if you choose to take that, would be looking to reduce Torvine's looked after population, including actions such as the potential for a residential facility in Torvine, the development of that proposal.
I think, sorry, Chair, but I think that's an important one. I spoke to the Chief Exec at Council, and he said the numbers have gone a bit stagnant now about looked after children since Jason has had his workload increased in education. So I think it's really important, and I think we need information on the new children's residential home, as it's up and running nearly, and we haven't even we don't know a lot about it.
I endorse what you're saying, because that was going to be my recommendation, my personal recommendation. How do the other members feel about taking that forward? Jane? Alfie? Linda? And Steve's gone, is he? Right, so we propose that our next meeting we will discuss reducing Torvine's looked after children. I'm sure that's going to be quite emotive as well. Another long session. So, our date of our next meeting, just to remind us, please. 20th of April. The 20th of April. Right. Thanks, members, for your patient understanding and all your questioning, which has been absolutely fantastic this morning. I hope you have a nice afternoon and a nice weekend, and see you soon, if not before the next meeting on the 20th of April. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Thanks, Bex.
Thank you.